Hi, I'm Melissa from foodandloathing.com. Recently, somebody said to me that the craziest thing he had ever heard was somebody becoming vegan. He said, "How could anybody become vegan? That's insane. You must have a really crazy story to explain why you became vegan." And you know what? He's right. I have a really crazy story, and here it is. So when I was a little child, I was about 6 years old. I was in a car with my father who was driving, and we were driving through these twisty roads through a wooded area, and we got into an accident. And this was before the child seats were required until whatever age they're required until. So I was just buckled in, and I wasn't hurt. So I unbuckled my seatbelt, and I went and I checked on my dad, and he wasn't waking up. And he was hurt, and I started to cry, and no one was coming, and I just wandered off into the woods. And before I knew it, some wolves came up to me, and they must not have viewed me as a threat. And they came up and they invited me in their wolfy way to join their family and their pack. So I did. I joined up with them, and the way they would eat is mostly they hunted. And so I said, okay, I'll try that too. I'll start to hunt with them. And they would sniff the air, and they could smell their prey. And I would sniff, and I couldn't smell anything. And then they would run really fast, and they could catch these little animals, and sometimes larger animals. And they had these claws, like I didn't like to have my nails cut as a kid, so my nails were pretty long. But they were still flat, but they had these sharp claws, and they could dig into the animals and kill them. And then they had these teeth where their mouths were forward like this with these sharp teeth, and they could bite into an animal and catch it and kill it. But when I tried to do that, it was like I couldn't hardly bite into an animal at all. I couldn't catch it with my hands. I wasn't equipped that way. And so I figured, okay, well, I guess I'll just eat what they catch, and I don't have to actually do the hunting, since they were very nice wolves, and they were willing to share. But once they caught a deer, it was all bloody and disgusting, and it didn't smell good, but they were smelling it, and they were getting all excited by the smell of blood, and I was not getting excited by the smell of blood at all. It seemed really gross, and I didn't want to eat this raw meat. It was disgusting to me, but they were all about it. They were like, yeah, raw meat, woo woo. And so I was like, well, what am I going to do? But luckily, it turns out that wolves are not carnivores. They are, in fact, omnivores, and they also would eat some wild plants in the woods and these fruits. So when I saw they did that, I was like, okay, well, I'll eat some of that. That sounds great. And I started to eat wild plants and things, and I was with them for a while, and then I began to observe the deer, and I started to hang out with deer some, and the deer showed me where lots of good plants were, and I ate a lot more when I was hanging out with these herbivorous animals. They could show me where all the good stuff was, and I also found wild mushrooms and things, and in that way I didn't starve. And also, the deer that I hung out with, some of them had babies. They had little baby fawns, and they would feed their babies milk, just like all mammal mothers do. And it never occurred to me oh, well, maybe I'll drink some of the milk from the deer mother, because I wasn't a baby deer, and I wasn't a baby at all. I had been weaned, and it's totally crazy to drink the milk of another creature past the age of weaning. And also, there aren't really wild chickens in the woods, but sometimes I would see that other animals would try to get the eggs from other birds that were up in trees. And those eggs were not, unlike chickens' eggs, they weren't unfertilized eggs, they were fertilized. But even if they had been unfertilized eggs, it was still the same thing. They would eat these things completely raw. They just wanted to eat them up. And I had no desire to do that. And it was much better for me just to live on plants. So then, a few months after I had been living in the woods, I was found by humans once again, and I went back with them, and my father, it turns out he had been found and rescued, and he was okay, thank God. And and I went, and they once again started to want to feed me meat. And of course it was cooked now, so it was actually something that my body could eat without dying and without getting really sick. But I knew then that that was not natural, that there was something gross and weird about eating these things, that my body did not go the way that these naturally omnivorous animals like wolves, they love to eat the raw meat. We don't have that at all. So I said no more of that, and I just continued to eat plant foods for the rest of my life. And so that's the crazy story about how I became a vegan. And maybe when you hear this crazy story, you'll start thinking, and you might join me.